Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Have you ever stopped to think about the invisible magic happening right in your living room? Or honestly, even in the headphones you might be wearing right this second? We are totally surrounded by sound, perfectly captured and projected, yet we rarely think about the everyday marvel that makes it all possible, the loudspeaker. So today we are going to unveil the journey of sound and break down exactly how these fascinating devices actually work. Now, to really wrap our heads around a loudspeaker, we actually need to think about a microphone first. A microphone's whole job is to take physical sound waves, the changes in air pressure from your voice or a guitar, and translate them into electrical signals so they can be recorded or transmitted. Well, a loudspeaker is basically just a microphone working in reverse. It takes those stored electrical currents and translates them back into physical vibrations. It literally recreates the exact sound waves your ears naturally pick up in the real world. Okay, let's jump right into section 1, the quest for sound. Before we crack open the modern hardware, it's pretty crucial to understand how we actually got here. Capturing and projecting the human voice was an absolute obsession for early inventors. It took an incredible 60-year sprint of innovation to really nail it. We kick things off back in 1861 with a self-taught scientist named Johann Philipp Reis. He installed an electric speaker on a telephone, but it could really only reproduce muffled speech in light tones. Then, in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patented an electric speaker that was actually capable of reproducing truly intelligible speech. Fast forward to 1915, and Peter Jensen and Edwin Pridham give us the very first moving coil speakers out in California. And, finally, boom, the massive breakthrough. In 1924, Edward Kellogg and Chester Rice at General Electric patented the dynamic cone speaker, and that is literally the foundational blueprint for almost every single speaker we use today. Now, I've got to tell you, not every historical invention in that 60-year sprint was a winner. Right in the middle of that timeline, in 1898, a guy named Horace Short won a patent for a loudspeaker powered entirely by compressed air. I mean, can you imagine? Blasting literal air from an external compressor to create sound definitely had some major limitations. While raw air pressure is great for deafening, blow-your-hair-back volume, it is absolutely terrible for the delicate, high-speed, varied vibrations you need for complex audio. So ironically, while it might have been insanely loud, the sound quality was horrible, and it couldn't properly reproduce audio at low, everyday volumes at all. But let's bounce back to Kellogg and Rice's brilliant dynamic cone. By 1926, the first commercial model based on their design hit the market, the RCA Radiola loudspeaker number 104. And get this, the price tag was a staggering $250. To put that into perspective, that translates to roughly $2,000 in today's money for a single speaker. But people were totally willing to pay this massive premium. Why? Because for the first time ever, it brought a flat frequency response and adequate bass straight into the home without needing those enormous giant horns that earlier speakers used. It was the absolute dawn of home entertainment, literally turning the average living room into a private concert hall. This 1920s design was so incredibly good, it essentially stuck around permanently. And that takes us directly from the historical stakes to the tangible, physical hardware. Which brings us to Section 2, Anatomy of a Loudspeaker. Looking at this X-ray teardown of a modern speaker, the anatomy is surprisingly simple, but man, is it precise. Up top, you have the large, lightweight paper cone. Notice how it's supported at the outer edges by those circular pleated paper springs? That allows it to easily move back and forth without losing its center. Then down in the very middle, you have the voice coil, which sits perfectly within the tight poles of a heavy, permanent magnet. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that moving coil right in the center. Look closely. You'll notice it has absolutely no core inside of it. It is literally just a hollow wrap of wire. And the reason for this comes down to one word: inertia. Any extra mass prevents that cone from changing direction fast enough. To recreate high-frequency sounds, that little coil needs to be able to accelerate lightning fast, reversing its direction thousands of times a second. So keeping the core hollow keeps the mass extremely small, which protects your audio quality. So we've got all these stationary physical parts, but how do they actually create sound? Well, that requires shifting our focus to the invisible physics of electromagnetism. Let's get into Section 3, the physics of hearing. Let's break down the 4 sequential steps that actually bring these parts to life. First, when the electrical signal from your amplifier reaches the speaker, it is constantly reversing the flow of alternating current. Now, because that hollow voice coil we just looked at is an electromagnet, this reversing current causes its north and south magnetic poles to switch rapidly. Remember that heavy permanent magnet sitting right next to it?
As the coil's polarity switches, it is violently repelled and attracted by that permanent magnet. It acts exactly like a high-speed piston in a car engine, violently pushing and pulling the attached cone. That cone then beats against the air, creating the exact sound waves that eventually hit your eardrums. It is an absolutely brilliant system. But it does introduce a major physical challenge when we start trying to listen to complex music.
And that brings us to Section 4, splitting frequencies and crossovers. So how in the world do you reproduce the entire spectrum of human hearing? I mean, from the deepest, floor-shaking bass of a kick drum to the highest, most delicate crash of a cymbal using just a single moving cone? Well, the short answer is you usually don't. You need different tools for different jobs. To create low-frequency, large wavelength sound, you need massive air movement. That requires a large, heavy cone known as a woofer. But here's the catch. Because of its heavy mass, a woofer is absolutely terrible at moving fast enough for high frequencies. For those high notes, you need a tweeter. That's a tiny, incredibly low-mass cone that can vibrate at blistering speeds without any distortion.
But wait, if you have a woofer and a tweeter mounted in the exact same box, how does the incoming music actually know where to go? Enter the crossover. Think of the crossover as the ultimate audio traffic cop. It's an electronic component that takes the incoming full-spectrum audio signal, breaks it down into different frequency chunks, and then directs the booming lows to the woofer and the crisp highs to the tweeter. Without a crossover acting as that traffic cop, sending deep, booming bass signals straight into a tiny, fragile tweeter would literally tear it apart.
Let's quickly contrast the two main types of crossovers you're going to encounter. Passive crossovers are the most common in everyday living room speakers. They use basic capacitors and inductors to physically block specific frequencies from passing through. The cool thing is, they don't even need an external power source. They run entirely off the audio signal itself. Active crossovers, on the other hand, are highly complex electronic components. They absolutely require their own power source, but they offer incredibly precise adjustable frequency control before the signal even reaches the amplifier. This is exactly why high-end audiophiles and studio producers often opt for active crossovers. It just gives them total control over their soundscape. So we have the drivers and the crossover sorted out, but they can't just sit loose on a table. We need to think inside the box, literally. Which leads us to Section 5, thinking inside the box. Here's something you might not realize. When a speaker cone pushes out into your room, it also pulls back, right? And that creates sound waves inside the wooden box itself. Enclosures handle this internal pressure in different ways, and it dramatically affects the sound you hear. Acoustic suspension enclosures are completely sealed. They use the internal trapped air pressure as a precise spring to snap the cone back into place, which gives you incredibly accurate and tight-sounding bass. Bass reflex enclosures, however, have a port, basically a hole, that channels those backward sound waves out into the room. This sacrifices just a tiny bit of tightness for a louder, much more booming sound that's perfect for home theater explosions. And then you have passive radiator designs. These use that trapped backward wave to move an entirely separate, unpowered speaker cone, giving you a really cool hybrid blend of precision and deep bass. Now, while the dynamic piston-pumping drivers we've been talking about pretty much rule the audio world, we should briefly slow down and acknowledge that alternative technologies definitely do exist. Stuff like electrostatic panels and planar magnetic ribbons. These use large charged magnetic fields to gently vibrate ultra-thin sheets of material, rather than pushing a heavy paper comb back and forth. They offer mind-blowing precision and detail for high and mid-range frequencies, but because they barely move any dense air, they for sure struggle to produce the heavy thumping bass you get from traditional dynamic woofers. And that brings us to a final thought for today. We've gone from Johann Philipp Reise's muffled 1861 telephone speaker to the $2,000 equivalent RCA wooden boxes of the 1920s, all the way to modern paper-thin magnetic ribbons. The innovation in translating electrical currents into physical waves of air has been nothing short of staggering. So as modern materials get even lighter and commercial magnets get exponentially stronger, how will the invisible waves of sound shape our future? Next time you turn on your favorite song or start up a movie, take just a second to appreciate the electromagnetic piston pump making it all happen. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.